This is Ron Warren with the Nuggets of the Torah. This week's teaching is the 6th parsha of Leviticus and the 29th parsha of the Torah, and it's called 𝐓𝐑𝐀, which means after the death. This parsha teaches about God's call to become holy as I am holy. Holiness cannot happen without the death and the burial of our will and flesh. Being holy means saying and meaning the words, "Not my will, Father, but yours be done in my life." Most believers have a misunderstanding of the word atonement. They believe they are being acquitted by what we think of as sin, or pardoned to the point that we are not held accountable for that sin. That's an English understanding. The English language did not exist when the Bible was written. The essence of the action that the Torah describes is kafar. This places the word atonement as covenant. Outside of the context of a living, vibrant, growing covenant relationship, the word atonement makes no sense. What needs kafaring has its root and essence in covenant. Kafaring is not a moral failing or any antisocial behavior pattern. It is a breach of covenant. Immorality and social welfare is not what makes kafaring necessary. It involves the restoration of covenant relationship. Now, what does that mean? If we are part of a covenant, that everything associated with our lives will, at one time or another, need what we call atonement. Atonement is not a theological concept that we are supposed to believe with our minds. It is a covenant reality. Consider this. The book of Leviticus can be divided into 2 sections. The first half concerns the operations and the sacrifices in the tabernacle, and the second half covers topics outside of the tabernacle. The words Ani Adonai, I am the Lord, is found only 2 times in the first half, and it concerns the food and the tabernacle, and it's recorded in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 44 and 45. But in the second half of the book of Leviticus, the words Ani Adonai, I am the Lord, is used over 50 times, and this is outside of the tabernacle. Why? The dwelling place of God's Shekinah is in the tabernacle, as emphasized in Exodus in the first half of Leviticus, and it could be easily led to a mistaken conclusion that the Shekinah is limited to the tabernacle. And we get behavior is great while we're visiting the tabernacle, but we can act any way we want away from it. The second half of Leviticus destroys that misconception. The tabernacle does not limit God's Shekinah. It channels God's presence from heaven to earth in order that it can originate from the tabernacle to the rest of the entire land. The second half of Leviticus contains commandments, which translates the intense level of Shekinah found in the tabernacle into our daily walks of life. You must realize God created 3 realms of holiness, and they were set down forever in the second half of the book of Leviticus. They are man, which you're going to find in chapters 18 to 22. It covers man and is set aside to serve God in order to elevate the spiritual level of all the nations. The second one is time. You're going to find that in chapter 23. It covers time, and it sets aside other days of the week for divine purposes in order to elevate the spiritual level of the entire week. And the second level is place. You're going to find that in chapters 21 to 26 because it covers place or land, and it sets aside from all others as God's specific land in order that it affect and elevate the spiritual level of the area which surrounds it. Now consider this. Leviticus chapter 16 covers the ritual procedure of the feast of Yom Kippur. Now the high priest, man, enters into the tabernacle or temple place on Yom Kippur time. You know, this is a bloody portion, and it comes from a bloody book. The eating of the blood existed in Egypt and Canaan. And in Leviticus chapter 17, verses 10 to 14, it deals with the prohibition against eating blood and the command to cover it. Now this forces a question. Does this commandment apply to us today? I want you to consider the scriptures of Acts chapter 15 verse 20, Acts chapter 15 verse 28 and 29, and Acts chapter 21 verse 25. But in Leviticus chapter 17 verses 10 to 12 are the verses that speak of the blood as atonement. And when you look at these verses in context, it deals with the eating of the blood. Any Israelite or any alien living among them who eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood, and I will cut him off from his people. For the soul of the flesh is in the blood, and I had given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood by reason of the life that makes atonement. Therefore, I say to the Israelites, none of you may eat blood, nor may any alien living among you eat blood. Again, why the blood? For three reasons. The first one is it's the life giver. Remember what I just read? For the soul of the flesh is in the blood. Blood is the life giver of the body, and it's something sacred and withdrawn from ordinary use. By not eating blood, man is honoring life. To eat the blood is to despise the life. The second one was given to man, again, and I have given it to you upon the altar. Now there are two basic reasons why the blood sacrifices existed in the pagan nations. One was to provide material from which the animal by which a soothsayer can discern the future of the worshipper. Livers were often used to determine whether or not a person would succeed in a particular endeavor. An example of this would be generals foretelling battle outcomes. And the second one was to appease the deities by giving them food through sacrifices and offerings. Remember, the pagans had no concept of sin. Now what's the difference? The blood on the altar was a spiritual welfare of the worshipper, not for the gratification of God. And the third one was to make atonement. Again, I read to make atonement for your souls. To make atonement means to cover over. Now this was provided so that sinful man could live in the presence of a holy God, not satisfy the hunger or an irate God. Now in requiring the blood atonement, God was teaching mankind three things. Number one, how serious man's sin is. Number two, that there was a breach in the relationship between God and man. Number three, any sin was a crime punishable by death. This showed God's justice, but it also showed God's grace. God accepted the death of the animal as payment for the sin, and the blood covered over his sin. And the shedding of the blood was a sacrifice, and the life for the life was a substitute. Now, how does this apply to the blood of the Messiah? 4 ways. Number one, it deals with a renewed covenant. Matthew chapter 26, verse 28 reads, For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. Yeshua was telling his disciples that his sacrificial death was the life which sealed the covenant renewal, and his blood was the blood of that covenant. The second one was through redemption. In Ephesians chapter 1, verse 7, it reads, For in whom we have our redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace. This redemption doctrine is based on actual slave practices in ancient Greek world. The master would bring his slave to the slave market in the city, and the slave would be put up for sale and bids would be offered. And when the master accepted a bid, he released all ownership claims to that slave. The slave was released or redeemed from the old master, never to come under his ownership again. And when the new master or the new owner purchased the slave, he paid a price. This is called a ransom to the old owner. And in Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, it reads, "Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many." But you've got to remember a very important statement. When the new owner redeemed the slave was still a slave, the personal property of the new owner. And this is what happens to us on our spiritual level in the Messiah. We were once a slave to sin, and Yeshua purchased us in the slave market where the price is paid, his life. The ransom for this purchase was the blood of the Messiah. He is now our owner. And what does that mean? It means we are not free to do whatever our flesh desires, but we are free to serve our new master, the Messiah, Yeshua. Number 3, it deals with being justified. In Romans chapter 5, verse 9, it reads, "Much more then, being now justified by his blood, shall we be saved from the wrath of God through him?" Now, justification means that a guilty sinner is legally acquitted by the judge of all mankind. And the book of Romans is a book about the doctrine of justification. Justification places us in the realm of the courtroom. Now this opens a question. What was it that enabled God, the perfect judge, to grant forgiveness and a legal pardon to sinners like us? The penalty for our sins were carried out on the Messiah. Because of his blood, God transferred his righteousness to our account, making us righteous. And once we were counted righteous, the judge legally pronounced us acquitted. The blood of Yeshua was the key element for our justification. The fourth way is through cleansing. In 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 2, it reads, "According to the foreknowledge of God the Father, in sanctification of the Spirit, unto obedience and the sprinkling of the blood of Yeshua the Messiah, grace to you and peace be multiplied." Consider this. The blood on Yom Kippur was used to cleanse the tabernacle, which is explained in the book of Hebrews, specifically chapters 8 to 10. This makes it fit to use for God's use. We, as a new creation, by the cleansing of the blood, are made able to be used to serve God and to come into his presence. Shalom. Until next week's episode of the Nuggets of the Torah.